Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Interventions and Detentions. I'm your host, Brad, principal, educator, lifelong learner, and someone who's been spending a lot of time thinking about one question and one topic lately. Rethinking devices in elementary schools. Have we just moved too far, too fast? I don't know. Let's think about that because that's what we're going to dive into today. Now, before you stop listening, before you think this is another anti-technology rant, let me stop you right there for a second. This episode is not anti-technology. I love technology. I'm all about it. And I'm all about it in schools to a certain extent. This is not going to be a nostalgic episode either. It's not a call to smash every Chromebook either. It's an episode about intentionality, folks. Intentionality. Developmental alignment for our kids and evidence. And what really helps kids learn in school. So let's dive into it. Let's get into it. How did we get here? Let's start with a story. Back in 2020, again, we do this a lot of times on Interventions and Detentions. We jump into the time machine and we go back in time. Let's go back about 6 years ago, almost getting close to the time of month. It was March 2020. We all lived in an emergency mode, COVID. One day, kids were in classrooms, things were going just fine, and the next day, we were sent home. We closed down. Not just schools, but the nation. We all lived it. We were there. We were scrambling as educators because even though the buildings closed down, school continued on, and it was expected to continue on. And we had done e-learning, sending home devices with kids with assignments on them, but to be that virtual classroom, we hadn't really jumped into that exactly yet. I know where I was at before, teachers were posting videos sometimes that they recorded of themselves, but we weren't doing this live instructions. Us leaders, principals, were trying to make sense of what platforms to use, where we could find Wi-Fi hotspots for our students and parents who didn't have them, and how to navigate things like Google Meet links and Zoom links. We did heroic educational work. Seriously. Okay, seriously, we did. Educators adapted faster than any profession on the planet. But here's the thing. We made logistical decisions fast because we had to keep school going. We didn't make developmental decisions during those times. We didn't pause to ask, what does long-term instruction look like when devices become the core instead of the supplemental? We were in survival mode. And that's fine for the moments that we were in at that time. But now, it's years later. Fast forward 6 years. We never took that pause. We never asked the hard questions. And now we have some data. We have some research. And we have trends to look at. So it's time for that conversation. Okay, it's probably been waiting to happen for far too long. And it's one that's been on my mind again, like I said, a lot, especially in the last 3 years of coming to a primary building. Across the U.S., most elementary classrooms now operate with some form of one-to-one device access, K through 12, whether it's iPads, Chromebooks, or something similar. And for some schools, that means daily blocks of devices being used in the classroom, being virtual learning ready, online platforms for literacy and math. Okay, textbooks are starting to phase out, or at least they have been over the last 6 years. We're also, very consumed with screen-based assessments, whether that's NWEA or your state assessments. I know our state assessments are all platform screen-based. There's also online instructional modules. There's tons of supports and strategies that are all tied to online, IXL, Study Island, Learning A to Z. We baked most of that into what we had to do. But again, we never stepped back and asked, are elementary brains ready for this level of digital engagement every day? And that's where the research becomes interesting to look at. It's not all black and white, but here's something important to chew on. There is research showing advantages to well-designed digital tools, especially for things like adaptive feedback, assistive technology, and collaboration when students are developmentally ready. Let me repeat that part. When students are developmentally ready. Okay, that's real. But here's another side to it as well. And this side gets less air, less talk. Let's start with the big international picture. Okay, some international findings. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development published a major study called Students, Computers, and Learning. What they found? Countries that are heavily invested in classroom technology did not automatically see higher achievement in reading or math compared to those that use technology more moderately or strategically. In fact, in some instances, moderate tech use was linked with better outcomes than heavy reliance of tech. Again, that's not a knock on technology by any means. It's merely a reminder that tools are just that. They're tools, and they don't replace strong instruction. On the health side of things, the American Academy of Pediatrics has long warned about excessive screen use and screen time, especially in our younger primary-aged children. They're not talking about high schoolers doing research papers. They're talking about developing brains, toddlers, preschoolers, early elementary, primary. Their findings link high screen exposure to many concerns like attention challenges. Does that surprise you? Poor sleep patterns. I see every single day kids coming in tired. And I don't think it's because of early to rise or late bedtimes. I mean, I think that's some of it, but I'm wondering now, is it more about the screen time that they're enduring throughout the day and into the evening? We're also seeing emotional regulation issues. Talked about that last week. And this isn't Brad being dramatic. This is pediatric research, folks, that has been consistent for years. And when pediatric experts start waving the red flags about screen exposure for our younger children, as educators, we ignore it oftentimes at our own peril. So the big question for us educators is every minute on a device adding value to our children and their learning? Or is some of it just convenient? Because that's where we are, folks. Devices make some things easier. Clicking through assignments, automated scoring, digital content pacing, online practice. Those all make educators' lives easier. But we do have to stop and ask, is easier actually better for that foundational learning? And that opens the door to deeper questions about the brain, which we'll explore deeper as we move on to this. And so before I keep going, I want you to sit with this for just a minute. We didn't question how schools used devices in that urgency of March 2020. We just did it. And now, here we are in 2026. Most of our systems still haven't taken that developmental pause. And that's not failure on anybody's part. It's just something that we need to stop and think about. All right. You're hanging with me so far, so let's keep going. We've set the stage. Now, we've looked at how we got here, the emergency pivot in 2020, and how one-to-one devices quickly became a standard in elementary classrooms across the nation. But now it's time to get into something deeper. Let's get into the brain itself for a moment, because all this policy talk, device rollout, and platform adoption is meaningless if it doesn't account for how young brains actually learn, which is the root of all of this. Let's start with something foundational, something called executive function. Executive function is essentially the brain's control center. Okay, think of it that way. It's the ability to plan, to focus, to regulate emotion, switch tasks, and hold information in working memory while doing something else. Here's the thing. Research tells us that these skills are still developing well into adolescence. They're not formed, they're developing. For example, a study published in Developmental Science showed that children's working memory capacity is limited in the early elementary years. They're learning to manage attention, to hold multiple steps in their head, and to organize materials. Now, think about a 7-year-old with a Chromebook open. They have tabs for Google Classroom, reading apps, maybe a math program, a spelling game, and a teacher-assigned video to watch. That's a lot of simultaneous cognitive load for a brain that is still learning to manage one task at a time. John Sweller's cognitive load theory supports this. He's shown that when working memory is overloaded, learning is less effective. Not because the content's too hard, but because the brain can't process it efficiently. So when we get kids in front of devices, we sit them in front of those devices all day. It's not just about screen time at that time, folks. It's about cognitive bandwidth. Let's throw that word out there for a minute. Cognitive bandwidth. So let's talk attention for a minute. Even outside of this digital world that we're talking about today, young children have shorter attention spans. Research from the American Academy of Pediatrics indicates that sustained attention improves gradually with age. A first grader may maintain 10 to 15 minutes of deep focus on one single task. That's all. I'm going to repeat that. 10 to 15 minutes of deep focus on one task. But devices, they're full of stimulation, bright colors, interactive graphics, quick feedback loops. Every click is rewarding. It takes you to the next thing. And that's the reward system. It can hijack our focus even when the intended task is academic. There's also emerging research that multitasking on devices, toggling between apps or notifications, increases mental fatigue. And it reduces retention in the process. So while a child might appear engaged on a math app, they may retain less than if they had completed the same assignment on paper. And here's an interesting piece. The OECD study I mentioned earlier found that heavy tech use in early grades did not improve reading comprehension or math scores compared to moderate or targeted use. So there's some alignment here between brain science and learning outcomes. Less is often more in our early elementary students when it comes to technology. Reading is a perfect example of how devices and how device use can affect learning. Research from DeGaldo, 2018, and other meta-analysis show that students often comprehend better when reading on paper versus screens, especially for longer, more complex text. Why, you might ask? Well, here's several theories. For one, spatial orientation matters. On paper, you can see how much you've read and how much is left, but on a screen, the progress is often abstract. Annotation is more tactile and natural on paper, highlighting and underlining in margins and taking notes. All of this contributes to deeper processing, but is very difficult to do on a tablet or a screen. Screens encourage skimming. If you think about it, I know when I read something online, I'm skimming. I don't like to read long text on screens. Short text, emails, things like that, it's not a big deal. But if I'm going to read an article or something like that, I don't read books online. I need it in my hand. Screens encourage skimming. The brain adapts to fast-moving text, but comprehension of nuanced ideas really suffers. For elementary students still developing foundational reading stamina, this is a huge deal. And there's another layer here that we need to peel back, the social and emotional developmental piece. Jean Twang's work on generational mental health trends, along with studies from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, points to a clear connection between early screen habits and the development of social skills. Think about it. Much of a child's social learning happens in under-structured moments. Hallway conversations, playground negotiations, small group collaborations. Screens, even in the classroom, can reduce those moments. If every learning task is mediated through a device, opportunities to practice things like empathy, conflict resolution, perspective taking, and self-regulation can be reduced. And that's not abstract. Teachers report it anecdotally all the time. More device time often correlates with less organic peer interaction, even when the children are engaged academically. The key to me here is alignment. High school students, totally ready for independent device use. They can manage tabs, submit assignments online, research, and communicate digitally, all while handling higher cognitive loads at the same time. Elementary students, they're still learning to focus on that one task at a time, to manage impulses, to navigate peer dynamics, to read deeply. So this is not about resisting technology. I'm going to say that again. This is not anti-technology today. It's about developmentally appropriate use for our kids. Devices should enhance instruction, not replace the fundamental building blocks of the learning. Some districts are already moving toward this balance. Shared devices instead of individual take-home devices in K through 2 grades. Teacher-directed intentional device use rather than constant availability. Paper-based foundational skills with digital tools as supplements. How about that one, folks? And you know what? It's working. Teachers are reporting better attention, better collaboration, and more collaboration, and improved reading stamina. So here's the take-home for principals during this conversation, and instructional coaches and school leaders. We really have to ask ourselves, are we using devices because they genuinely improve learning outcomes, or because it's easier to manage, track, or appear more modern? If the answer is anything other than intentional impact, we need to rethink the approach. Because at the end of the day, what we measure in clicks and screen time is not the same as what we want to measure. We want to measure comprehension. We want to measure creativity and resilience and social emotional growth in our kids. All right, take a breath for a moment. Take a break and a breath. Think about your own building. If you're in a school setting, walk the hallways, watch first graders work, count the devices, and count the interactions. Ask yourself which moments are building attention, which ones are building independence and deep thinking, and which ones are just creating passive engagement. That's the tension that we need to sit with for a moment. We've talked about the developing brain, attention, cognitive load, and the reading impact of screens. Now, I want to move into something just as important, the social and developmental realities of device use in these elementary classrooms. Because here's the truth, folks. School is more than academics. We talked about it last week with our recess episode. It's also where kids learn to be human, where they practice negotiation, empathy, cooperation, impulse control, all the things that don't show up on a Chromebook or iPad dashboard. Let me give you a concrete example. Walk into a first or second grade classroom that is device heavy, okay, 1-to-1. Students are logged in, headphones are on, working individually. On the surface, it's quiet, looks engaged, teachers circulating, learning is happening. But what are we losing in this process, in this setting? We're losing those small, organic interactions, the partner talk, the table discussions, the spontaneous problem solving that occurs. That's dramatically reduced. Research from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning, mentioned it before, highlights that social emotional skills are best built through real-time, face-to-face interaction, especially in those early years. Skills like conflict resolution, cooperation, and perspective taking don't develop in isolation. When you overlay constant device use, you reduce the opportunity for these organic moments. Kids aren't just learning content on a screen, they're losing micro practices that build executive function and that social competence. I've seen it, you've seen it. Teachers notice subtle things. They notice increased off-task behavior when devices are mismanaged. Students who rely heavily on digital prompts and struggle with independent problem solving, less peer-to-peer verbal interaction, especially in our younger grades. Teachers feeling like facilitators of technology rather than facilitators of the learning. It's not universal. Many teachers are skilled at integrating devices meaningfully. But across the board, high volume device exposure in our early grades is not a neutral environment, folks. It's just not. So let's talk logistics, something most leaders wrestle with, like snow days, weather cancellations, and virtual synchronous learning. Secondary students, middle and high school, you folks are generally ready for virtual instruction. They can manage Google Classroom, complete assignments independently, and engage in video lessons, synchronous learning with minimal scaffolding. Our elementary students, however, not quite so much. I'll put in a disclaimer. I feel like the corporation that I work in, my primary building, our elementary building, those students and those teachers, I feel like are doing the best they can in the situation that they're given. There's live instruction and learning going on, but it's not the same as what it would be in the classroom, obviously. But it works, I think, for the most part. It works for us to count a day. And if that's the goal, then I do think we need to maybe step back and rethink it a little bit. And I'm trying to stay off my soapbox here a little bit in this process. But, there are some districts that are making some clear distinctions in this process. Elementary K through 2, some people are going back to those paper packets going home, independent reading, small teacher guided check-ins throughout the day versus that live instruction. Grades 3 through 5, a little more limited and a little more structured virtual instruction with explicit guidance along the way. Middle and high school, full virtual access with asynchronous and synchronous options throughout the day. This approach is intentional. It's not punitive. It recognizes the developmental readiness while still keeping older students prepared for digital workflows. My first year here at the building that I'm in now, I was able to convince our superintendent that our primary kids aren't ready for virtual learning. They're not going to get out of it what they would in the classroom. It's hard for our parents to support that instructionally at home. It's hard for our teachers to teach that way and for our kids to learn. And so we decided as a K through 2 building to scrap it for the rest of the year. And ultimately, we had to tack on 2 days at the end of the year, which I didn't think was a bad thing. It seemed like it worked out well. And all was good. And then going into the next few years, we decided to stay the course with virtual learning K through 12. And again, it's not perfect. It's working to the best that it can. Okay. But like I said, there's districts around that are actively scaling back device dependency, especially in these lower grades, like we did, while maintaining that robust technology access at the middle and high school levels. Some examples, Wake County, North Carolina, K through 2 classrooms have shared devices with teacher-directed sessions. Grades 6 through 12, they maintain that one-to-one take-home Chromebook. Fairfax County, Virginia, early elementary focus on paper-based literacy and math blocks with devices used for structured research or targeted interventions. Portland Public Schools, Oregon, there's pilot programs going on where they are intentionally reducing daily screen time in K through 3 grade levels and using devices primarily for accessibility supports, a tool. What's the common thread? Well, devices are tools. They're not environments. Instruction is still the focus. Devices support it, but they don't replace it. Here's what a balanced model or a balanced approach could look like grade band by grade band. All right, let's start with kindergarten through second grade. You could have that daily literacy blocks which would be device free. Put the devices over in the charging station for a while. You can have some hands-on learning and manipulative time. You can have some short, structured, teacher-directed tech sessions. No take-home devices. Move to grade 3 through 5 for a minute. That gradual increase of device use, more targeted research projects, digital writing drafts, explicit instruction in digital citizenship, that's huge. Still not fully device dependent yet in grades 3 through 5, but moving into that as we go into middle school. You're going to bridge the year of independent device use. You're going to give clear expectations for online collaboration and digital responsibility. Keyboarding introduced with some intentionality. Gradual increase in independent digital tasks. High school. Full digital integration aligned with college and career readiness. It just makes sense. Research databases, learning management systems, collaborative documents, career and technical educational tools, independent, self-managed online learning. Notice that alignment. Younger students focus on the foundational skills. Older students develop digital fluency and independence. If you're a principal or district leader listening, here's the hard truth. It's easier to standardize one system K through 12. I get that. It's harder to differentiate by developmental readiness. We found that out when we took it away. We took synchronous away from K through 2 on virtual learning days. It's hard to differentiate because it causes a ripple effect. For us, it was busing, feeding the kids, keeping them back for 2 extra days, things like that. Those are all things that we had to deal with and we worked through. But harder doesn't mean wrong either. Leadership can't always be about what's convenient. It's got to be more about the impact that we're having. If you're asking, are we using technology in a way that maximizes learning and development? Then that's the right question. On the other hand, if you're asking, how do we manage devices and subscriptions more efficiently? You're really missing the point. For our classroom teachers, some takeaways. Be intentional with tech. Don't assume more screen time equals more learning. Prioritize reading, handwriting, discussions, and tactile activities in the lower grades. Use devices to supplement, not replace those foundational skill developments. Small adjustments matter. A 15-minute device-free reading block, structured tech time, or partner discussions can dramatically improve focus, retention, and social skill development. So we've walked through how we got here, what the research says about the developing brain, attention, cognitive load, reading and social skills, and teacher observations. We've seen what some districts are doing differently, and now let's put it all together, tie it up with a little pretty bow, because if we stop at analysis without action, then all the thinking doesn't really matter. Some of you might already be thinking, but devices are essential. We can't go backward. How will students be ready for middle school and high school without constant exposure to the devices? What about virtual snow days? All right, let's break these down, folks. Let's break them down. First, devices are important. Okay, we're in that time. Okay, we're in that era. I'm not going to say they're not important. They are, absolutely. I'm not saying otherwise. But the key, again, is intentional use. Devices should enhance instruction, not replace the foundational learning. I can't say that enough. For younger kids, that means this: literacy blocks on paper, hands-on manipulatives for math, teacher-directed instruction, supported by devices, not mediated entirely by them. Second, the readiness for the older grades. High school students, they do need independent digital fluency, but developmental research shows that younger students gain much more from foundational skill development first. Attention, handwriting, reading comprehension, social interaction. More than that from a constant device use. This is supported by studies showing better comprehension and retention in paper-based reading versus screen reading for elementary age students. Again, that comes from Delgado, 2018. And it doesn't prevent them from becoming tech fluent later. You can scaffold device use gradually across grade bands like we talked about. Third, virtual or weather cancellation days. Okay, yes, elementary students need support if learning shifts online temporarily, but that doesn't mean full-scale synchronous learning. Some districts are intentionally differentiating. K through 2, going back to those paper packets, teacher check-ins, brief guided online activities. I will say, disclaimer for here in Indiana, that does not count as synchronous learning. Okay, we can't do paper packets and count it as a synchronous learning day. That's not virtual instruction, unfortunately. Shifting to grades 3 through 5, more short synchronous lessons plus teacher-guided assignments. That really looks more like what we do here at my primary building. We have short live interaction synchronous learning, and then we've released the kids to go work, and then we bring them back, let them go work, bring them back. At the middle and high school, full virtual capabilities, of course, they're ready for it. This approach respects developmental readiness without creating a gap in that digital literacy. If you're a principal or instructional leader, here's what you can do next. Okay, audit the device use in your buildings. Walk the classrooms. Observe the time on devices. Compare it to time on foundational skills. Set intentional tech windows. Use devices with purpose, not constant availability. Differentiate by grade band. Lower grades use devices for targeted instruction. Upper grades for independent and collaborative work. Train the teachers in cognitive load awareness, something I want to do with mine. Help them recognize when a digital task is adding unnecessary complexity. Communicate with parents, folks. Explain why younger kids aren't on devices constantly, and it's developmentally intentional that we do that. Use hybrid models for snow and virtual days. Structured guided online work for elementary and full virtual access for secondary. Collect feedback, observe outcomes, academic performance, engagement, social interaction. These are the real measures that you're going to use. Small shifts can produce large ripple effects. My final reflection, folks, I want to leave you with some of these thoughts to sit with. I have said it several times today, so it's going to be like the dead horse. Devices are tools, not learning environments. Developmental readiness matters. Intentionality trumps convenience. Balance is not regression. Folks, that's leadership. Think back to the hallways you walk every day. Think about the first graders, second graders, the teachers navigating devices and apps, and ask yourself this. Are these tools serving the kids or just serving the system? And if you're honest, you'll see where small, intentional changes could improve focus, could improve comprehension, could improve social skills, and could improve long-term development in your students. And that, at the end of the day, is why we're here, to build better schools for our kids, for our teachers, and for learning that lasts. So the takeaway today, it's not a call to ban devices, even though it would be easy to say that, and maybe this even sounds that way. It's not Brad saying we needed to ban devices, burn them, throw them away, anything like that. It's just a call to pause and to reflect and to use them more intentionally, to differentiate by age and that developmental readiness, to lead with evidence, not convenience. There we go, folks. A heavy episode this week. Maybe not as fun as the recess episode, but one that, again, has been on my mind. I'm very passionate about technology and its use in schools, but also its appropriateness in schools. And when you're coming from a K-1 building like I am, I'm really starting to see the developmental impacts that technology is having on our students, both negatively and positively. We just have to be really intentional in their use and reflective of that developmental readiness in our kids at whatever grade level that is. If this episode makes you a little uncomfortable, good. I want you to sit with that because I was a little uncomfortable. Let it motivate your reflection. If it makes you curious, even better. Try one small change in your building and observe what kind of changes happen. Folks, leadership's not easy. School's not easy. Teaching's not easy. But we owe kids environments that are developmentally sound, socially rich, and above all, academically rigorous. Devices can support all those things, but only if we use them wisely. I want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in again to Interventions and Detentions. Remember, every week a new episode drops Friday mornings at 8 a.m. on all your favorite podcast listening platforms. Take this conversation back to your buildings, your team, your parents, your friends. Ask the hard questions, listen to the data, and above all, folks, lead with intentionality. There we go. Whew, words are hard. This has been another episode of Interventions and Detentions. Remember, it's where the real learning begins. I'm Brad, and I'll see you next week.